Aches and pains have certainly gone up very much during the pandemic. Unfortunately, our guest this morning here in the Sports Corner is here to help you guys out. We welcome performance trainer and PT, Dr. Nick Rolnick, to the show, the human performance mechanic. Nick, good morning. How are you?
I'm doing great, Bobby. How are you?
I'm doing great. So great to see you. And obviously, like I said, I think it's been a very trying time, not only because of the virus, of course, which I think is still something that is, that's something that we're dealing with, unfortunately, even if the numbers might be a bit better than they once were. But I think a lot of people at home are dealing with some of the residuals of that, not just the physical, but the emotional too. And we wanted to talk to you this morning about basically your anecdote to anxiety. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, well, first and foremost, I think, what I've adopted in terms of my philosophy of how I approach the human body is important, because that really segues into the importance of any recommendations that I would give for addressing something like anxiety. And I believe, my philosophy is that I believe that the human body can be viewed as almost like a perfect machine. And it's a machine that has evolved over hundreds of thousands of years to coordinate its many moving parts to work in unison to maintain some sort of equilibrium and optimizing its performance. But unfortunately, the body isn't really able to effectively recognize an imbalance that may develop in the system. And unfortunately, has a difficulty being able to self-correct. And just like any machine, like you would go to a mechanic that will look at the total, the system, the body, the car, for example, and find out what's causing that particular imbalance and addressing it so that that car can ultimately work and then go back to driving you around, wherever you're doing. So I really, in that lens, I consider myself much more than just a physical therapist and a performance enhancement specialist. I consider myself the human performance mechanic. And my job is to take things like pain, which I typically see on a daily basis in my practice, and instead of just treating the pain, which I feel is a very common, approach, they actually don't end up treating you may miss treating the actual cause. And once we can address the cause that is most likely producing that imbalance in the system, well, then we can return the patient or client, whoever I'm working with, back to optimal performance and get them back to the activities that they love as quickly as possible. So that kind of transcends into, even if you don't have aches and pains, or we're thinking about anxiety, it can be viewed as another imbalance in the system. And obviously, anxiety has multiple different causes. But what we do know about anxiety is that there is a strong or a potentially strong benefit of physical activity, in a structured physical activity, on being able to manage those symptoms and return, in my, my philosophy, my perspective, the individual back to optimum performance.
Yeah, this concept of basically working out to beat the stress and to try to overcome some of these things that we've discussed, Nick. I mean, obviously the world right now, these are separate conversations, but not an easy place, whether it's inflation or record gas prices, or like I said, even some people, having a harder time dealing with the virus itself. And I don't think, there's no denying that working out or keeping active and some of these things I know you've touted in other interviews, whether it's, getting in that extra walk or parking the car a bit further away so that you can get some extra steps. So all these little changes, these little lifestyle changes will help you in the long run.
Yeah. What I have found the most effective, both as my experience as a physical therapist, but also as a performance enhancement specialist and the human performance mechanic, is that when we are looking at making a behavior change, it can be daunting and it can be really stressful in and of itself. And I think that what we should recognize is when people make a health behavior decision, a lot of the times it's 0 to 100, meaning that instead of saying, okay, I'm going to exercise a little bit more and maybe try to get in, to the gym once a week to start, if I've never been to the gym before or had any structured activity, it then becomes, I'm going to go to the gym 3 times a week and I'm going to do cardio twice a week. And now all of a sudden you're staring down the barrel of, 5 additional gym sessions per week or exercise sessions per week. And you haven't really set up any sort of foundation to be able to reap that reward, because you then view exercise as more of transactional. And I recognize that there are going to be some individuals that are listening that, view exercise as a transactional, modality or approach. But I always try to highlight that behavior change can be scary. And so the easiest way that I've had, that the evidence also recommends, but I've had success with my clients and patients, is to make small, meaningful changes that over time, will amount to significant changes in your life, but might seem very small at first. And what you mentioned before is some of the perfect examples that I give to the clients that I work with, which is, all right, if you got to drive everywhere, well, see if you can bike somewhere. Or if you're going to go to a park, if you have to drive, then try to park at the furthest spot so you can get an additional benefit of walking. So you're not necessarily shoehorning yourself into, oh, I need to really go to the gym 5 times, because what happens if you miss a session? Okay, you miss a session when you first start out, and now you have the additional stress of making that session up. And I think it's really important from just the guidance or the coaching perspective to appreciate that once you make that behavior decision, or you have the intent to make that behavior decision, that you're put in an environment where you can build self-efficacy, which is just the positive belief that you can accomplish what you set out to accomplish. And that's my role. And I love that role, because it can be fit into a rehab perspective. It can be fit into a performance perspective, and even a lifestyle optimization perspective. So that's kind of my soapbox over there.
Well, it's very good, Nick. I mean, and like I said, I think, a lot of people during this period of time have seen their workout regimens maybe change. I mean, especially in the beginning, of course, with having to stay at home. I know for me, that was kind of thrown out of the mix too. My routine at one point that I had, I've completely lost it. So I'm hoping to be inspired by this interview this morning to kind of get back on it. And, thankfully been somewhat able to maintain my weight, but I think in terms of being, I'm out of shape at this point, and it's actually had some effects. I know for me during this period of time, whether it's dealing with some elbow tendonitis, which I think is a residual of working from home, or even carpal tunnel, things that I had never had to deal with before. And I think it's very interesting, especially for our viewers at home that are probably dealing with some similar issues, residuals probably of the pandemic and from working at home.
I think you really hit the nail on the head there with what the average person is likely going through with all the stress that's going on with our society, and how there is uncertainty about the future. Anxiety can be viewed as some sort of imbalance that's in the system. So what we can do to combat that from a non-pharmacological intervention is focused and targeted exercise, because then we change the balance of pro-inflammatory, which is that fat, and anti-inflammatory, which is those muscle tissues. So now all of a sudden we can change and tip the balance back in favor of anti-inflammation. And now all of a sudden we're feeling better and we're looking better. And it is truly that reward from pushing through that discomfort when you're doing exercise that you're really going to reap those benefits.
That was part 1 of our interview with the human performance mechanic, Dr. Nick Rolnick. Tune in next Monday for part 2.